This is Keith Jordan of the Hudson Valley Guild of Mental Health Professionals, and today I'm interviewing another guild member, Kelly. You have to tell me whether it's Kelly Bassett or Kelly Bassett Buono.
Either, it's fine.
So, can you tell me about what you do professionally?
Sure. I am a licensed psychoanalyst. So I do outpatient psychotherapy for individuals, for adults, and for couples. And I deal with a pretty broad range of symptoms or issues: anxiety, depression, grief, loss, life transitions, divorce, trauma, women's issues, things like that.
So, just about any kind of problem people would have, they could go to you.
Correct.
So, what got you interested in doing this work?
Well, I actually had about 20 years of a completely separate career before I became a psychotherapist. I was working and living in New York City, kind of in the rat race. I knew I no longer wanted to be a rat, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I sought out some therapy to help me figure that piece out, among other things that I was kind of struggling with at that point in my life. And I ended up eventually, after meeting a couple of therapists that I didn't care for as much, I ended up eventually in the office of a psychoanalyst. I had no idea what that meant. I was a completely uninformed consumer at the time. But the work with her was life changing and transformative. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do professionally, it dawned on me that I could do what she does. And at the same time, a very beloved family member, my Aunt Sharon, was retiring from being a college professor and started training as a psychoanalyst in California. And simultaneously, the laws changed in New York State that allowed psychoanalytic institutes to train lay people like me to become psychoanalysts. And so it was sort of a wonderful, perfect, lovely storm of things that allowed me to become a therapist.
Uh-huh. So, can you tell us more about your education?
Sure. I went to the University of Maryland at College Park for undergrad, studied culture and foreign language. I stayed at the University of Maryland and did a master's degree there. It was called Counseling and Personnel Services. And I got completely sidetracked away from higher education administration and counseling by the educational travel industry. It wasn't until I got to New York years later, found out that I could go back to school, that I had this opportunity to train as a psychoanalyst. And that was a 5-year, 4 of them full-time training program at a psychoanalytic institute called the National Institute for Psychotherapies in Manhattan. It was intense and all-consuming, and probably the best thing I've ever done in my life, personally and professionally.
So, how would people learn about your services? How do you get referrals?
I get referrals from a couple of sources. I do some passive advertising on websites like Psychology Today. I'm also a member of a couple of group supervisions. And so I get some from colleagues and also from word of mouth, from patients, current patients or past patients who refer people to me.
So, what would you say sets you apart from other therapists? Why would someone go to you as opposed to somebody else?
I would say the fact that I'm a licensed psychoanalyst is kind of a unique thing. It's a relatively new license, so there are not a ton of us out there. Analysts tend to be concentrated, I think, in more urban areas in our country, and so I'm in a very more rural area. And so I think in some ways my training in psychoanalysis is a specialty of mine, and kind of a unique approach. Someone who wants to do kind of deeper work would probably be a good match for me. I've had, 20, almost 20 years of another whole career, and I've lived abroad. I've studied languages, so I have traveled extensively all over the world. There's a diversity to my experience as a human being, which I bring to my work as a therapist. And so I think I have the ability to relate well to most people that I meet. Um, and then the other thing that comes to mind is that I'm not afraid of complexity. It actually, psychoanalytic thinking, I think, lends itself to complexity. And so I think I'm particularly good at taking seemingly disparate details and themes and experiences and kind of coalescing them into something that can be really meaningful for people.
Uh-huh. So what would you say is, the basic difference between a psychoanalyst and other psychotherapists?
I tend to think that as an analyst, I pull from all sorts of other theories, including cognitive based theories. And I think people who are more cognitively oriented pull from psychoanalytic ideas, that there's less of a divide than perhaps people might think. Um, Perhaps what sets psychoanalysis apart is the belief in the unconscious, that unconscious motivations and thoughts and anxieties that are outside of our awareness. And part of the work is to bring them into awareness. And once they come into awareness, then we can work with them. And that's probably, in my opinion, that's probably the biggest difference. There's for sure an emphasis on childhood in psychoanalysis, but I think that any therapist will think about someone in context of their whole life, regardless of their training. So I don't know that that's particularly unique to psychoanalysis, but for sure, I kind of hold people's childhoods in my mind almost every session, even if the material is kind of very present.
So how would somebody contact you if they wanted to make use of
Mhm.
your services?
I have an office phone number, and I can give that. It's 845-281-8881. I'm working on a website, so to be determined. You can Google me and my website soon. And I also, you can email me. It's kelly@kbbpsych.com. I'm currently predominantly still doing telehealth, although I'm going to kind of slowly start to return to the office. I'm relatively new to the Hudson Valley. I grew up here, but I haven't lived here as an adult or a professional until recently. And so I had a practice in Manhattan. I had a practice in South Jersey near the Philadelphia area. And now I'm in the Hudson Valley. And so I've actually been doing telehealth even before telehealth became our only option due to the pandemic. And so that's another perhaps thing that sets me apart, is that I will continue to do telehealth. And I can work with folks who live in New Jersey or New York. And so if someone's looking for psychoanalytic work and they just don't have access to it geographically, I can be a good option in that sense. But I look forward to getting back into the office, at least part-time.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for doing this interview.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keith.